In the heart of Eastern Europe, whispers of Crimea reverberate like a haunting refrain. As dawn broke on the 23rd of August, an almost palpable murmur wafted across the political corridors of Ukraine. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, always one to embrace enigma, proclaimed, "Everything began with Crimea, and everything will end with Crimea." With those words, he painted an intricate canvas of the historical and present-day face-off between Ukraine and its imposing neighbor, Russia. Embedded within Zelensky's cryptic words was a nod to 2014, a year etched in the annals of Ukrainian history. It was then that Russia, with a shadowy blend of diplomacy and force, annexed the Crimean Peninsula. And yet, the Ukrainian president's pronouncement was not just retrospective, but audaciously prophetic. That Ukraine's future holds the promise of a reclaimed Crimea, a notion many initially dismissed as fanciful. In 2014, the global consensus didn't bode well for Ukraine. The colossal Russian military, considered second only to the US, seemed poised to steamroll the fledgling Ukrainian defense. Ukraine's inventory, reminiscent of a bygone Soviet era, appeared to pale against Russia's modern arsenal. The dream of a free Crimea seemed like just that, a dream. However, as months transformed into years, the winds of fortune subtly shifted. Defying all prognostications, the indomitable spirit of Ukraine started making inroads against the Russian behemoth. By 2022's close, Ukraine celebrated significant triumphs, most notably liberating Kherson. As Western support poured in and Russia's underbelly showed signs of vulnerability, the distant mirage of Crimea started inching closer to reality. But the road to Crimea is no straight highway. Its topography is a natural fortress. Almost insular in character, Crimea's tenuous link to the European mainland is the slender isthmus of Perekop, a dream terrain for any defender. This natural choke point could easily become the grave for any advancing contingent. Moreover, the Sivash expanse offers its own challenges. These sprawling, shallow lagoons can be traversed at low tide. But such an advance is perilous. A returning tide could leave troops marooned and exposed. Direct assaults, whether from the sea or sky, are fraught with peril. Crimea's expansive coastlines are formidable barriers. With Sevastopol, a bastion of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, standing sentinel, naval forays appear quixotic. Russia's regional aerial and maritime supremacy, fortified by state-of-the-art missile systems, further compounds Ukraine's challenge. Zelensky's declaration, when viewed against this backdrop, morphs from mere words to a profound enigma. Does Ukraine truly harbor hopes of reclaiming Crimea? And at what sacrifice? The unfolding saga promises answers, albeit veiled in the complex interplay of war and statecraft. Furthermore, if Ukraine were to mount an offensive, they would face a fortified Russian defense in the Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. These aren't mere landmasses, they pulsate with historical resonance, particularly Donetsk, a crucible of conflict for years. Ukraine's aspirations also hinge on Melitopol and Mariupol. Mariupol, a jewel of the coast, holds strategic allure with its ports. The Russians, keenly aware of its value, are unlikely to cede ground without a fierce contest. Even if Ukraine manages a foothold in these zones, Russia's lifeline to Crimea remains intact via their naval and aerial prowess. Their Black Sea Fleet, anchored at Sevastopol, is a maritime behemoth. Moreover, Crimea's skies are zealously guarded by advanced air defense systems, making any Ukrainian aerial gambit exceedingly treacherous. Logistics loom as Ukraine's Achilles heel. As they forge deeper into adversarial territory, maintaining supply lines becomes paramount. Every advance necessitates a rear guard to safeguard their lifelines, diverting crucial assets. This strategic quandary awaits Ukraine as it contemplates its next move. If Ukraine were to reclaim the peninsula, it would face a complex dilemma regarding this post-2014 population. These individuals, many of whom might have settled in Crimea believing in a long-term Russian future for the peninsula, would now be caught in a political quagmire not of their own making. Forcing their relocation would pose both moral and logistical challenges. Such an action would be viewed internationally as forced displacement, a violation of human rights, and could lead to significant tensions both within the peninsula and on the global stage. Russia could capitalize on this, depicting itself as the protector of Russian people against Ukrainian oppression. This would not only stoke nationalist sentiments within Russia, but could also further drive wedges between Ukraine and certain sections of the international community. On the other hand, allowing this largely pro-Russian demographic to remain in Crimea could foster a hotbed of dissent, acting against Ukrainian interests. The presence of a significant number of Russian loyalists might lead to frequent calls for referendums, demands for special status, or even civil unrest. Furthermore, this situation could provide Moscow with a continued means of exerting covert influence in the region. The issue of the Crimean Tatars, the indigenous people of the region who have historically faced persecution and displacement, adds another layer of complexity. Their demands for greater autonomy, rights, and reparations for past injustices would need to be balanced against the interests and sentiments of the post-2014 settlers. A possible solution could be the granting of special autonomous status to Crimea, with guarantees for both the indigenous populations and the post-2014 settlers. This could provide for representation and rights for all residents while ensuring that Crimea remains under Ukrainian sovereignty. International observers and peacekeepers might be necessary in the initial stages to oversee this transition and ensure the protection of all communities. However, such a solution would require immense political will from both Kyiv and Moscow and a commitment to prioritize the well-being of the Crimean people over geopolitical ambitions. Given the deep-seated mistrust and the high stakes involved, this would be a challenging feat. The situation underscores the profound challenges that arise when geopolitical ambitions collide with human lives and aspirations. The question of Crimea's future isn't just about territory, it's about the people who call it home and their right to a stable, peaceful, and dignified existence. Given the potential human cost, such an act would not only be morally questionable, but also strategically counterproductive. Massive population transfers or deportations would likely draw severe international condemnation, potentially diminishing the support Ukraine has received from the international community. Additionally, a forced migration of that magnitude would create a major humanitarian crisis. The disruption, trauma, and potential loss of life would be immense. Displaced individuals would face challenges ranging from finding new homes and jobs to being separated from their families and communities. The repercussions of such a move would reverberate for generations. The dilemma becomes even more complex when considering the potential security implications. A forced deportation could galvanize a pro-Russian insurgency within Crimea, creating a protracted conflict that Ukraine would have to address while simultaneously trying to rebuild and reintegrate the peninsula. Russia would likely seize on such unrest, using it as a justification for further intervention and potentially drawing the region back into open conflict. Moscow's ability to harness propaganda is not to be underestimated. The portrayal of ethnic Russians as persecuted victims would serve to solidify domestic support for the Kremlin and might even galvanize international actors who are skeptical or critical of Ukraine's actions. However, the flip side of the coin is equally challenging. If the post-2014 settlers are allowed to remain in Crimea, their presence could continually challenge Ukrainian sovereignty. The peninsula could become a hub of pro-Russian sentiment, leading to persistent calls for reunification with Russia or, at the very least, significant autonomy from Kyiv. In navigating this labyrinth of challenges, it's clear that unilateral actions, whether by Ukraine or Russia, would likely exacerbate the situation. A multilateral approach involving international mediators might be the most viable path forward. Such a process would require compromises from all sides, and even then, there's no guarantee of a universally satisfactory resolution. The challenge of Crimea underscores the profound difficulties of modern geopolitical conflicts, where historical grievances, national pride, and human rights intermingle, creating scenarios with no easy answers. The path forward will require not only diplomatic finesse but also a deep commitment to the principles of justice, human rights, and international cooperation. Given the heightened stakes and the looming threat of Russia resorting to unconventional warfare tactics, including chemical or nuclear strategies, a different approach for Ukraine might be on the horizon. Instead of a full-scale reclamation of Crimea, what if Ukraine shifted its focus to undermine Russia's stronghold there? By securing strategic pathways, including Zaporizhia and Kherson, Ukraine could potentially isolate Crimea, exposing Russia's weak points. Such actions could send Moscow into a panic, especially with the thought of losing their prized base at Sevastopol. A trio of possible scenarios unfold. 1. Diplomatic turnaround. Envision a future where Crimea, along with other annexed territories, reverts to Ukraine's domain. However, such a bold move might provoke unrest within Putin's administration, possibly igniting even more intense confrontations. 2. Compromised handover. Russia might let go of the captured regions while clinging onto Crimea, yet this halfway measure might still hang a sword over Ukraine, with the perpetual threat of Russian aggression. 3. A neutral ground. Picture Crimea as an autonomous demilitarized zone, With UN peacekeepers standing guard and Ukraine maintaining the water supply via the Crimean Canal, Russia might get to keep its presence in the Black Sea via the Sevastopol fleet but would have to forsake other military installations. Such a strategy would potentially put Ukraine in a position of strength, diminishing the immediate threat from Russia in Crimea and reclaiming much of its lost land. Russia, meanwhile, would secure its pivotal Sevastopol base. But the intricacies of conflict seldom offer clear-cut answers. Wars often birth from diplomatic breakdowns and clashing agendas. Both nations stand at a crossroads filled with tough decisions, and a one-size-fits-all solution remains elusive. Echoing Zelensky's sentiments, the story started with Crimea, and with it, the final chapter will be written. In wrapping up, it's essential to understand that nations' overarching agendas are vast and layered, far more complex than the straightforward aims we often perceive.